Hey everyone, Tony Vlahos here, Chief Marketing Officer of ExecuNet, and I'm speaking today with Peter Bregman. Peter, of course, is a CEO advisor, leadership consultant, Wall Street Journal best-selling author. I know there's another one coming on the way, and we'll talk about that as well. So Peter, thank you for sharing some time with me today.
As always, it's a pleasure to be with you.
Wonderful. So I just want to ask you a few questions. First, out of the gate, what makes us strong at work?
It's a great question, and you could go in a lot of different directions with it, right? I mean, you could talk about skills, you could talk about competencies, you could talk about knowledge or capability, and all of those things are important. But ultimately, what really makes us powerful, what really makes us most effective at work, is when we're grounded, is when we know our center. I mean, these are sort of Eastern, maybe considered frou-frou-y words, but you know when you're with someone who's grounded, whether it's in success or failure or uncertainty. They don't lose themselves, they don't fly off the handle, or they don't cringe. They know themselves. They are steady and grounded in a way that they're able to use all of this knowledge and skill and capability and experience to address the most important issues that they have to address in the moment, no matter what's going on. And that's an elusive talent, right? And it's a personal talent. It's not something that's easy to read about or to go to a 2-hour training class and then suddenly you're grounded. It's life work to be that kind of person. But those are the people who are most successful at work.
What aspects of being grounded are you referring to? I mean, are we talking about foundation of knowledge? Is it something else, relationship oriented?
Yeah, I really think of it as emotional.
Okay.
So if you're emotionally grounded, meaning, because that impacts everything. That impacts, there's a business problem. Right. And we all know people with whom or for whom when there's a business problem, they lose themselves. They yell in the hall or they don't know what to do. And those are emotions. Right? The emotions that we get in various situations, those are the things that derail us or that help us to succeed. And so to be grounded emotionally enables us to then be grounded intellectually or to be grounded conceptually or experientially. So it's, when you really look at it, and I've looked at this, I've looked at, people who succeed and people who fail, and I look to say, what's the difference? And I've worked with CEOs who are very successful and some who really struggle. And it's always the same. None of them fail because, they don't know something or they didn't have a certain experience or, they weren't mentally stable.
Yeah. No,
they fail because in very difficult moments they lose themselves and they don't take the actions that they need to take in a steady, credible way. So I really think of it as emotional. And it's not emotional intelligence. Emotional intelligence is very much about what you know and what you're aware of, and that's great. But this is something deeper than that. This is how you act.
Got it. Okay. Is that what we want from our leaders? I mean, do we want leaders that, above all other things, that are grounded?
Yeah, I think, and I use this term emotional courage a lot, and you and I have talked about it a little bit. And I think we want emotionally courageous leaders. Emotional courage is the difference between what I know and what I do. It's the ability to tolerate uncomfortable emotions. I had this really interesting conversation with a friend of mine who has tried to lose weight, and he's lost. He did lap band surgery, so he's lost a bunch of weight, but he still struggles with his weight. And we were talking about the challenge of losing weight, and it's an interesting challenge because I bet 90% of the people, at least in this country, aren't happy with their weight in one way or the other, right? I mean, it's a problem that confronts us. And what I say about it, and what I said to him is, look, it's a math problem. It's a math problem. Like, we could disagree on the margins, but 95% of it's a math problem. How many calories are you taking in? How many calories are you putting out? If you take in more calories than you put out, you're going to gain weight, right? We could argue about, I'm not talking about how fit you are, how healthy you are, whether you're eating the right calories, but ultimately in terms of weight, that's what it is. If it were that simple, why aren't we all the perfect weight, right? We can all add. Why aren't we all the perfect weight? And it's because the science, the knowledge, the capability to lose weight exists with all of us. We all have it. But the challenge that we face, the real challenge, is am I willing to tolerate the uncomfortable feelings necessary to not eat. That's the challenge. The challenge isn't, do I know that fried foods are good for me or not? The challenge is, am I willing to feel a little hungry and not eat? Am I willing to feel a little bored and not eat? Am I willing to feel agitated and not, am I willing to feel what it takes to moderate what I eat, right? Ultimately, losing weight is an emotional problem, right? It's not ultimately a scientific problem, right? We've solved that one.
Right.
And so really when you look at something as simple as losing weight, right? And I'm not saying losing weight is simple. I'm saying how you lose weight is simple. It's actually very hard to lose weight, and it's hard to lose weight because of those emotions. But to be grounded in my emotions means I can take the actions I need to take, even in difficult circumstances, to follow through on what's important to me. And if that's true for losing weight, imagine how much more true it is even for leadership, right? Because in leadership, what we look for in leaders is to take smart, courageous actions. Am I willing to have difficult conversations? Am I willing to take risks? Am I willing to act powerfully and strongly in a situation where I'm not clear what to do? And by the way, that's what leadership calls us to do. Leadership calls us to act when we don't know what to do. Otherwise, we're not leading.
Sure.
Right? And so, we're clearly doing something that's counter to what everyone else is doing. If not, we're just part of the pack or we're following. So if I'm going to do something that's counter to what other people are doing, I have to be comfortable enough with myself and grounded enough in order to be able to take those actions and not be swayed from them. So do people walk around saying, what I want is emotional courage in my leaders? I don't know that they've thought about it as much as I've been thinking about it. But I do think they know it when they see it, right? It's kind of like pornography, right? Like you know it when you see it. And so I think they know it when they see emotionally courageous leaders. And when they see emotionally courageous leaders, they look and they go, that's a really great leader.
Sure.
So ultimately, I think the answer is yes. We look for emotional courage in our leaders. We don't necessarily have the language to describe it that way.
Or we know it when it's absent.
We know it when it's absent. And we know when someone's not showing emotional courage. And as leaders, we need emotional courage because that's how we close the gap between what we know we should do and actually doing it, which is the big challenge.
You work with a lot of CEOs and other leaders. What are the moments where most of us seem to lose our emotional footing? I'll use those words.
Right.
Are there some sort of examples you can share?
Sure. I think they're almost...
And how to regain that footing?
There's categories of it. So one of the important categories is interpersonal, right? It's very hard when you're facing someone. It's hard to fire someone. It's hard to give them a performance review. It's hard to tell them sort of where they're going wrong, or sometimes for some people where they're going right, right? It's hard to have a difficult conversation in one way or the other. It's hard to bring up an undiscussable in a table full of people. So when I work with a CEO and their leadership team, one of the first things that I do is I go interview everyone and I figure out what the undiscussables are. What are the things that we're not talking about? There's this big issue in Europe. We're not talking about it. There's a problem with the product. We're not talking about it. There's an issue with quality, or there's an issue with sales. We're not talking about it. What is it that we're not talking about? Then I get everybody in a room and I bring those things up. And I make them discuss the undiscussables. And you could probably track the rising rate of a stock price based on the willingness of the leadership team to discuss undiscussables, right? It's that important. So I think that's a place. And those are two things. One is, am I willing to talk about things that are sensitive? But the question is, why wouldn't I be willing? And the reason I wouldn't be willing is because of how other people are going to feel. Because when I'm going to talk about the problem in Europe, the head of Europe is in the room. When I'm going to talk about the problem in sales or the problem with quality or the problem with a product, those heads are in the room and they're going to get defensive. So it takes tremendous emotional courage to not get defensive and to actually think as a leader about how we solve that problem. It takes tremendous emotional courage to bring up the issue. Right? And so those are all interpersonal. There's also the business risk. So there's the courage that it takes for me to look at a situation and go, I don't know exactly what's going to happen in the future, but I'm going to make a bet. And that bet is going to place money and resources and time and effort and focus on a particular opportunity or challenge that may or may not pan out, right? It's risk.
Right.
That's another area where emotional courage is really necessary. And it's also the emotional courage to look and be able to say, it's not working out, and I'm going to stop it. versus stay committed to it for so long that you end up destroying the business in pursuit of a dream that doesn't exist.
Right.
But it also is required, you need the emotional courage in order to be able to see it through even when it looks difficult. And how you tell the difference between those two, that's a huge challenge. And it's a challenge that requires the emotional grounding, right? To be able to separate out your fear of failure and your drive for success, to pull those back enough to be able to look at it and go, what am I actually seeing here? Right?
Sure.
That's all emotional courage, emotional grounding.
So is emotional courage the subject of your new book?
In some ways, it's actually, the emotional courage is very connected to my new book, but I think the book after that is going to be called Emotional Courage and going to be really focused on it. The new book that's coming out at the end of February,
Yes.
February 24th is the actual date. And my understanding, by the way, is that pre-orders, I was just on the phone with the publisher, and they were saying pre-orders are really important. So when it's out there, let's get pre-orders. But it's called 4 Seconds.
4 seconds.
4 seconds, right? My last book was 18 minutes.
Right.
I keep getting shorter. It's going to be, we're going to be in the milliseconds
read.
by the emotional courage. 4 seconds, and it's all the time you need to stop a counterproductive habit.
Wow.
And get the results you want.
Wow.
And the idea behind it, and this is also, you're right, that there is a lot of emotional courage in it. Like, it's not, I don't specifically talk about emotional courage, but it's all over the book, which is that, we talk about changing a habit. It takes 21 days, and it's really hard, and you need planning, and et cetera. And I'm saying no. I'm saying I disagree. I actually think it takes 4 seconds, right? It takes the amount of time to take a deep breath, right, allows you to make a different choice. So let's keep the eating paradigm,
Sure.
right, because we talked about it before. If I want to lose weight, right, and I go and I've got a plate full of cookies in front of me, and my instinct, my habit, my knee-jerk reaction is to grab a cookie and eat it, right? Or if I'm, take a walk away from the food issue, if I'm leading and someone yells at me, or someone questions my leadership, or there's a problem that shows up and a client calls and there's an issue, I have a knee-jerk reaction. And we all have knee-jerk reactions, and the big, I don't know if it's a secret or the big discovery that I have, which is that we think our knee-jerk reactions would be useful because we use them all the time, but they're incredibly counterproductive most of the time. Someone yells at me, I yell back. How does that help the relationship, right? That we have these counterproductive, energy-sapping knee-jerk reactions. And they're not hard to replace, but we need to pause. We need 4 seconds to take a deep breath and ask, is this the smartest thing to do? What's the outcome I want here? What's the best move, right? So if I'm about to eat a cookie and I take a deep breath and I ask myself a question, right? Like, do I really want this cookie? I mean, I know I want the cookie, right? I know it looks good, it smells good, I want the cookie. But, given the outcome that I'm going for, do I really want this cookie? And just taking a deep breath and asking that question is often enough to subvert the behavior because you're reminding yourself what it is that you really want. And the book is filled with not just that idea, but knee-jerk reactions and what to replace them with. So if someone confronts me, I have a knee-jerk reaction. What's a better knee-jerk reaction? Right? Maybe a better knee-jerk reaction than yelling back at you is to ask you a question. And if I know that, then I can subvert my knee-jerk reaction. Right? Or if someone comes to me and they've failed and they're talking, what's our instinct? When someone's had a hard time with something, what's your instinct? Right? You want to make them feel better.
Sure, big
right?
hug.
Yeah,
right.
Big hug, and to tell them, look, it'll be okay.
Yeah.
Don't worry about it. There are other, women or men out there. There are, you'll do better in the next race, whatever
Right.
it is. Well, it turns out those are actually pretty ineffective things to say to someone, that they make us feel better because we're uncomfortable. This comes back to the emotional courage. We're uncomfortable with the way that with their feelings of failure. So we want to stop them and make them feel better, right? But the reality is, what they need isn't for you to argue with them that they shouldn't feel bad, that they'll find someone else. It's for you to empathize with them and to be able to just listen and go, that's really hard. And maybe that's enough, right? And so it's about knowing what our knee-jerk reactions are, taking a deep breath, breathing, and being emotionally courageous enough and capable enough to subvert our counterproductive response to something and then replace it with any number of better alternatives that get us to where we want to go, that get us to better relationships, that get us to be more effective at work, that get us to fix our mindset so we're not beating ourselves up all the time.
Right.
So that's what the book is about.
Very cool. So emotional groundedness is something you gain experientially.
Yes.
And 4 seconds is something you can be taught or teach yourself. Do you address both of those things in your intensives?
Yes. So the intensive is the favorite thing that I do, right? And we have one actually in the next couple of weeks, starting in October. And yeah, it's a place. It's pretty exclusive, right? We limit it to 20 people, and it's 4 days, 3 to 4 days, and it's a place that it's a lab almost, where we can go in and wrestle with the hardest issues that we're facing. Excuse me. So when we're all of us have patterns. All of us have, issues that we get. If you look at your career, I look at my career, there's situations that I keep getting into, that I've gotten into. I could look at the last 3 jobs that I've had. I kind of do the same stuff, right? I mean, it's sort of the nature of being a flawed human being, right? As we tend to repeat that stuff. So the question is, how do you subvert those patterns so that you're more effective in the next place? And it's experiential in that there's nothing. If I show you a bunch of PowerPoints, right, about how to act more effectively, it's not going to work. It's not going to change anything. You might become wiser, but it's not going to change anything. The real question is, when I'm in those situations, if I'm in a situation and I'm wrestling with a challenge and I fall back into the pattern, are there people around who could point a finger and go, hey, do you see that? That's what's going on. Now, feel in your body what's happening. Feel in your body how you're reacting to this particular situation, right? Because if you can connect with that feeling here, you're going to know what it's like there. And we act or don't act based on feelings, right? We do things or don't do things based on the way we're feeling or the way we want to feel, right? And so I'm not going to have that hard conversation with you because I think it might feel pretty bad, or you might reject me and I don't want that feeling. So our challenge is to experience the feelings and stay with them long enough to be able to become acquainted with them in a way that we can, in the context of them, choose a smarter way to act. And when we get the experience to do that, surrounded by other really capable senior people, leaders, when we can do that with their support, and when we can stand in support of other people doing that, then when we leave, we have the capability to do that in the real world. And so when I was actually, just before this conversation, I was reading a testimonial that was just sent to me by someone who's in the program. And one of the words she used in the testimonial that I thought was really interesting was persistent. That she'd not been to a training that was so persistent, right? And she explained what she meant by persistent, which was that 8 months later, and it's 8 months since she was in the last intensive, 8 months later, she still changes her behavior based on what happened in the intensive, right? So there was persistence to it. And it's because she felt things there, and she feels them now, and she's not afraid of feeling them, and she's not afraid of acting in the context of feeling them. So I love it because it's,
that's the payback.
Yeah, and it has the impact. Like, you hear someone 8 months later saying, I'm still changing my behavior based on something I did 8 months ago, right? And it's because we're tapping into not just the mind. I don't show a single PowerPoint slide, in 3 or 4 days. It's all about engaging with people around their challenges, and they emerge with solutions, practical solutions to problems they've been facing, and a kind of emotional strength and groundedness and courage in their ability to execute.
Awesome. They can learn more about it on your website.
Yes, on my website. Yep.
And we'll look for the book, 4 Seconds.
4 Seconds, February 24th, but order it early.
We'll talk about that. All right then. Thank you, Peter, as always, for
my
your time
pleasure.
and your insight.
So fun talking.